Good afternoon and welcome along to this meeting of the Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee. I'll declare it open and welcome everybody along via Zoom in the studio, the council chamber. Although two of us understand that, Councillor Lush and Councillor Clark. We have everybody else connecting via Zoom. Some staff are here as well. We have an apology from His Worship. Would somebody like to move that is received? Councillor Councillor Soper and Councillor Kett. We'll put that all in favour. Hands up.
Aye.
Against?
Aye.
No one. Carried. Just a reminder, and it's there in your agenda, that if you've got a declaration of interest to make it at the time. I have an interest but not a conflict on item 7 in the agenda. Interest lies in the fact that my wife is part of the charitable trust for Saving Grace, but I don't believe I have a conflict. That aside, I still will not vote, but I will still be able to chair the item through the meeting. Any other declarations that anybody would like to make? None. We'll move into, there are no items of public forum that I'm aware of. I'll move into the report from the Invercargill Youth Council. We don't have any youth councillors here to speak to it, but I was present at the meeting. I'm happy to move that it's received. Councillor Crackett is seconding that.
Yes, yes, thank you.
If not, I'll put that motion. All in favour, hands up.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Was that an abstention, Nigel? Minutes from the August meeting of Performance Policy and Partnerships. Would somebody like to move that they are true?
Move those, Mr. Chair.
As
Councillor Soper and Councillor Lewis. Any matters arising? Not, I'll put the motion. All in favour, hands up. Cool, thank you. Proposed right of way in relation to the subdivision at 129 Regent Street. Michael.
The report that's before you, councillors, does comply with the council policies and framework, so I'll take the report as read and open to any questions.
Thanks, Michael. There's 2 recommendations there. Is somebody willing to move?
I shall so move.
Councillor Lewis, seconded. Councillor Amundsen, thank you. Any questions or comments?
There have been no objections to no public dissension to the suggested names, I would assume.
No incidents, issues that we're aware of this time. Thanks for asking, Graham. If there are no comments, it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Up. Thank you. Against? Carried. Which brings us to the Saving Grace project updates. Rhiannon.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora, councillors. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes. Awesome. So I'll take this report as read. This report is bringing back to the committee for consideration terms for the grant that was agreed as part of the long-term plan for discussion by councillors.
Thanks, Rhiannon. There are 3 recommendations there. I'm looking for a mover. Councillor Amundsen, seconded Councillor Kett. Open for questions or comments. Councillor Amundsen.
Yeah, I've just got a question really about the very last recommendation stating that this 100,000 funding will be the total funding provided to this project by council. Just wondering really whether that is necessary, and if it is deemed as necessary, does it preclude them from applying to council funds like the Community Wellbeing Fund in future for parts of the project around the building and or around the services that they intend to provide or host there?
Rhiannon.
So the question as to whether it is necessary is probably a matter for discussion by councillors. The second part is yes, it would preclude coming to council for other funding towards the project.
So when you say towards the project, do you mean specifically around the build and the refurbishment, or do you mean both that and any future activities that they run there themselves as well?
That is a good question. We might need to amend the wording to be clear on that if councillors wish to retain that point D, that what was meant by that point was to enable the completion of the project to opening. I don't think you would want as councillors to say that at no point in the future during operation would they be excluded from applying to, for example, to the Community Wellbeing Fund.
So my personal view on this one is that it's not really necessary, and I'd be quite happy to take it out if other councillors were happy to take that particular week
Did you
out.
move it?
I did.
So you-
I
are you-
seconded.
Second.
So
I
it would
actually
require an
seconded that.
amendment, wouldn't it?
Hang on, through the chair, thanks. So it was moved by Bex, seconded councillor Kett. Rebecca, are you suggesting that you are amending your motion by withdrawing item D?
Yes, I would like to do that.
Councillor Kett, as the seconder of the motion, are you comfortable with that?
I feel that D should remain in there. It states clearly that it's for this project. I know in the future they'll have numerous projects, so I feel it should remain in there.
Okay, so any change then would need to be by way of amendment because we don't have the consent of the seconder.
Am I allowed to amend something that I moved?
I would rather it came from elsewhere.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll move the amendment.
Thanks. Councillor Clark is moving an amendment that D be removed. Is there a seconder for that
I'll
amendment?
second that.
Councillor Soper, thank you. We'll deal with the amendment first. Anybody wishing to speak to the amendment? I have noted that you want to
Yes.
speak. Councillor Lewis, is that about the amendment or the motion at large?
Amendment, about the amendment, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Chair. I wonder if it does have to be changed because it's funding to the project, not subsequent projects that may be run at Hurt Saving Grace. For example, something in the order might come to creative communities for an art venture, and that would preclude it. That would not preclude it because the motion that actually says to the project by council, funding provided to the project, and the project is pretty specific in the agenda, I would have thought.
Councillor Kett, were you indicating what you've already spoken? Sorry.
And I'm just giving a thumbs up to Councillor Lewis. He's hit the nail on the head.
Oh, thank you. Anybody else wishing to speak to the amendment? Councillor Abbott, or are you just thumbs upping as well?
No, I'm not. I just have a recollection that when we discussed this originally, there was a tag, and the tag was that it was to be a one-off for this particular construction. And thereafter, I felt that people could apply on their own right, or they could apply on their own right for anything else. So I don't really see the need for the amendment, but I'll go along with it.
Okay, Councillor Amundsen.
Can I just get clarification from what Councillor Abbott has said? So if we keep this statement in, then they can't apply for any additional funding for the project at all. But what you just said was, it seemed to me like what you were saying is that they would be able to if we kept it in.
My understanding from Graham is that they could still apply for the other funders from the other funding.
So
stream.
just to clarify, what Councillor Lewis said, and pardon me for paraphrasing Graham, was that they would be able to apply for funding from Creative Communities, which is a fund essentially that comes in from outside of council. But what Rhiannon had said earlier on is that it could well preclude Project Grace from applying for anything else. Just so that you're aware of where I'm at, I have Councillor Crackett, then Councillor Soper, and then Councillor Kett. So I'll come to Councillor Crackett first.
So would the amendment then make sense to read that the $100,000 funding will be the total funding provided towards the practical completion of the construction of the project and not subsequent activities. So therefore, it's only for the construction portion and doesn't preclude us doesn't preclude them for applying for any of the subsequent activities they choose to undertake.
Okay, so just to clarify, the amendment is actually about taking D out altogether.
Well, my
what
suggestion would be to
another-
alter it.
Well, we've already got an amendment, so that will have to either succeed or fail before we can look at another one. Okay. Sorry,
Sure.
are you comfortable with that?
Of course.
Well, not comfortable. That's Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. As the seconder of the amendment, I was just going to clarify, because I thought some other councillors might have picked up that the amendment wasn't quite what it meant. So the amendment is to remove D altogether. If D is removed altogether as the seconder, my understanding then is that saving grace could apply for any subsequent project or activity. But we have already told saving grace when the 100,000 was granted that it was a one-off. So we already have the saving grace has already been told the 100,000 is the only 100,000 for this project. My feeling was to leave it in rather clouds the waters. We would not want this particular saving grace to be the only organisation we had ever told could not apply for any other activity. So my feeling was it clarified the situation to remove D altogether. Thank you.
Councillor Kett.
Yeah, just a comment. I feel that D should be left in, as I said, but just change a couple of words, that this 100,000 funding will be the total funding provided to this project only by council. And that will cover everything.
Yeah, well, we'll see if we get to that point. Final right of speaking to the amendment is with Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, I still stick with the amendment that D's excluded or withdrawn, because I think the statement made by the staff member created a level of ambiguity that we were not aware of, that it could preclude other things. We've given an undertaking to them that it's 100,000. If they wanted more, and if that was a possibility they wanted more, we still have the right to say no. We're only committing in this to what we've already verbally committed to them. And I think that having that in there, if it does preclude other applications, is confusing.
Thank you. Okay, we're now going to vote on the amendment, which is the removal of item D from the recommendations. All those in favour of the removal of item D, if you can raise your hand.
Two in the room.
And 2 in the room. The amendment is carried.
Thank you.
So essentially, we go back to the original motions, which is recommendations 1, 2, and 3. And recommendation 3, it's A, B, and C. I think in summation, before we open up for discussion on that, Councillor Clark was right in what he said, that there's been a good indication given that the amount is what we have signalled to Project Grace. We're comfortable with giving, but it does preclude them from coming back for something else at some other point. Really, it's about the $100,000 for the next year showing in the long-term plan. So coming back to the original recommendations, are there any other councillors who wish to speak? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour, if you can raise your hand. Carried. Thank you. That brings us to item 8, which is Helicopter Trust funding. Councillor Clark, would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So as part of an approach by the Trust to the Southland Mayoral Forum, I gave an undertaking that I would raise this issue through the paper that's come up. I understand that there has been some previous applications by the trust, and it may well be that as an outcome of today that we may well seek an officer's report that gives us some backstory to it. But certainly at the mayoral forum, there was a discussion about what each of the three councils would pay. And certainly what I was putting forward is subject to the other two parties also contributing as well, that we're not going it alone. So the paper's there, and I'll leave it with what outcomes people want.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I think the second item in the recommendation is key. Oh, sorry, the third item is key, and that the 50,000 that's looking at being contributed from ICC is contingent on both Southland District and Gore District contributing to the levels as indicated. I understand Gore District are discussing it this afternoon, but I guess, Mr. Day, what we're going to need is just a brief paper that indicates what the effect is on the annual plan portion of the long-term plan around how that funding is made. And if we can get that, I think it might help provide some clarity. Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I've got absolutely no doubt about the worthy cause of the Helicopter Trust, and of course I absolutely support the trust. My slight concern is that I thought as council we had discussed the arrangements we've made with the Community Wellbeing Fund as a way of lessening the one-off approaches by a lot of organisations in an ad hoc manner after we had finalised a long-term plan and so forth. So I'm just wanting some advice, I suppose, from staff as to why this would not fit into suggesting an application to the Community Wellbeing Fund.
Can I just come to Councillor Lewis first of all,
Yeah.
because I know it was suggested that it goes in his direction. But Councillor Kett, I have noted that you want to speak as well. Thank you. So Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. We do in the Community Wellbeing Fund have a rather strict rating system, point system. There's no guarantee that would fulfil a high ranking in that situation until we had a formal application. We'd have to do budgets, effectively posteriors on seats, and the benefit to the actual city. And a city Community Wellbeing Fund is funded a lot to be around the centre city, the activity in the city, rather than the very well meaning thought of the Helicopter Trust.
Thanks,
But
Councillor.
I would have to see a formal application first, Chair.
Rhiannon, do you have some feedback on that comment just before I come to Councillor Kett?
In the report which was brought back, we could certainly touch on the matter as to where and the channel through which the funding ought to go. If it was decided to deal with it separately, it would still be possible, for example, to give a scoring against what it would have scored had it gone through the Community Wellbeing Fund. This might be a matter that the Chief Executive has another comment on. No.
I think it's just something to quickly reference in the report how it may have done against that matrices, but really the effect on the annual / long-term plan would be what we need. And I think by that stage, we'll also have an indication of where things are going with the other councils. I'll come to you in just a moment, Councillor Clark. Councillor Kett, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yep, it's a great project run by great people, and I do support it. But I'm just want to ask a question. How much did the Lakes District Council contribute?
Councillor Clark?
I'm not sure about the district council. They had it when they presented. When Jules presented, he had a list of business people in the Lakes District that were contributing. They seemed to range from about 10,000 to about 25,000. He had a list of donations. The trust gets a significant amount of operating costs from the central government. It's one of the designated helicopter rescue systems in the South Island. I think one of 3. but it doesn't get funding for specialised equipment and for training as well. So that's where they have to fundraise.
Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Partially. I was on council when this application or a similar application came a few years ago. And another question that was asked then was what percentage of Southland people would use this service? Because the question that was posed then was the Queenstown is a tourist mecca, not going too well at the moment, we know why, and that was only a handful of Southlanders would use this service. So I just wonder if there's any figures of what's happened in the past?
So there are two trusts actually, but Councillor Clark might be able to help out there.
So that question was asked when we had the Southland Mayoral Forum, and there was two bits of information that came back that led me to support this application. The first one was that it's the services provided for the Southland region, Wakatipu and Southland, goes up as far as part of Otago as well. And as the presenter said, it's not a matter of does the Invercargill city with its boundaries get benefit from this, because we all in Southland travel out into those outlying areas that surround us, so out into the district area as the first option. And he said the other side of it is they have quite a bit of work transferring from our local hospital through to Dunedin Hospital, which is a tertiary hospital. So we definitely get better benefit of the latter. But when I asked Jules specifically, what's your predominant workload? Is it tourists that get lost in the bush? Is it people living out in outlying areas? And he said, no, it's just people in Southland that are travelling within Southland. And it was ironic the day that he put his application, the chopper was sitting in the main street of Gore, picking up from an accident.
Just before I come to you, Councillor Abbott, it might be useful if the paper also detailed the other helicopter trusts operating in the area, because I think they are also involved in patient transfer.
Yeah, there's one in Dunedin.
Yeah. Councillor Abbott, thank you.
You just made the point about the other operating, and they do transfer from hospital, as Councillor Soper and others know, and I've been a frequent flyer on some of them, unfortunately, and well looked after and well cared for with absolute care and comfort. So I'm going to support it, but I agree that we need to talk to Michael and just see how our funding streams are. And if we could make that as part of the recommendation, I'd be happy to move it.
I second.
Right, so your recommendation is, because we didn't actually have one on the table.
Yeah, there is.
Very generous of me letting discussion go so far, is that we call for a report seeking clarification on the financial implications and more detail on the other trusts that are operating within the area, which was seconded, I think, by Councillor Kett. Is that right? Councillor Clark.
Yeah, just as a final thing, we're always mindful of what the impact is going to be for households or for ratepayers. Some quick maths would show you that this support of 50,000 will cost the average household $2.50 per year. So not a significant amount.
Thanks. You're right. And when you break it down like that, it is a small amount, but a little bit of clarity. And if we can get that back to the October meeting and we can make a recommendation to council at that point, that would be good. So is everybody clear on the motion? The motion is that we're calling for a report from Mr. Day on the financial implications of the recommendation of providing $50,000 to the Helicopter Trust, contingent on funding support from both Southland District and Gore District councils, with financial implications on the LTP and details on other trusts operating. I'll put that. All in favour? Hands up. Against? Carried. Thank you for that. Which brings us to the activity reports for a very interesting period. Things were starting oh so well before COVID struck. Reaching over for the microphone. It'll be a joint effort. Who wants to go first?
Kia ora koutou, councillors. So over lockdown, we saw our teams work very closely to maintain our services for the community. We did see an increase in customer contact, which was positively received in the call centre, and we're able to assure our community that they would not be facing penalties for rates or dogs. So again, that will be comes into effect on the 21st of this month, so next week. We were impacted in our planning team after lockdown by not being able to visit some sites, but we have contacted those customers and saw a slight delay with some building consents. Our LIMS remained reasonably steady, and also our property file requests. We are scanning on demand for customers for those properties, and that's been very well received. And what else can I tell you? We did receive a number of noise complaints over lockdown, and also we continued to manage some challenging animal control situations through our team and with the assistance of the police. So those things were still in operation, and we're following through on any further work in those areas. And I welcome any questions before I hand on to my colleague.
Thanks, Trudy. Just in relation to the animal attacks, any of them likely to result in prosecution, or is that still a matter that's resting with the police?
Still a matter resting with the police. We're just reviewing things.
Okay. Councillors, any other questions for Trudy? Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I think you've summarised up the bulk of our report from the Leisure and Recreation Group. Really good start to the year, and we're now going to have some interesting results over the coming months as we deal with the impacts of lockdown. So happy to take any questions on this report too.
Councillors, any questions for Steve? If there are none, look, I'll just reinforce that, you know, things were tracking along nicely until mid-August, and then we got thrown a quick curveball. Let me praise the staff for the seamless way in which they've been able to transition in ensuring uninterrupted service delivery. It's been less a feeling our way as we go process this time. There were learnings from our first time in lockdown, and it's made the transition a lot easier. I think, you know, there were a lot of questions around overdue books and payment of rates and fears around those, which through our comms team we moved to alleviate as quickly as we could, making people aware that once we shifted down to level 2 from that date, they would have 2 weeks in which to pay. And even as I came into the Civic Administration building today, there was still just somebody seeking clarification about that from front of house staff, and B, positively responding to the fact that we had done so in that way. So thanks to your teams for the way that they've been able to adjust and continue to service. Somebody like to move that the activity report is received. Thank you. Councillor Lewis and Councillor Abbott. It's open for questions or comments if there are any others. If there are none, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Councillors, there being no further business, that is going to be the end of our live stream. Thank you to those who have joined us. But if you can remain online, we will have a workshop presentation